Thank you very much, Dan, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to this webinar. As Dan has just mentioned, the purpose of this webinar is to look at work done late last year and early this and throughout this year on projects to facilitate environmentally sound ship dismantling. Just one moment. Okay. Can you still hear me? Yeah? Yes. Okay, just having a few technical issues here. Just to give a quick overview of our webinar, I'm giving a quick introduction on what we will discuss today. I'll provide a brief introduction on the origins of the project. I'll then hand over to Roy Watkinson, who is our consultant, who has undertaken the case study, as I said, throughout this year. Roy will then pass back to me, and I will give some further information on our upcoming capacity building projects, and then we'll have time for question and answers. So to give some background, the project we're going to discuss today falls under the Global Program for Sustainable Ship Recycling. Now, initially this program, which was set up by the, I'm not sure if I can still be heard, can I? Yes, okay. Initially this program was set up by the Secretariat of the Basel Convention as a way of facilitating discussion amongst stakeholders to ensure that we have a coordinated approach to our capacity building work on ship dismantling. This was launched in Bangladesh in early 2008, and basically the governments of Bangladesh, other key stakeholders in the region, ILO, International Labour Organization, and International Maritime Organization were present. Following its launch, the global program was endorsed by the Basel Conference of the Parties and the Joint Working Group of the ILO, IMO, and Basel Convention on Ship Scrapping. Now, since that time, a variety of activities have been undertaken under the global program, and these are undertaken essentially at parties' request. So to move on to the case study which we're discussing today, essentially the idea for this study came from another capacity building activity undertaken by the Basel Convention. This was a ship recycling technology and knowledge transfer workshop which we held in Turkey in 2010. Now this brought together the government and industry in Turkey with the government and industry representatives from Pakistan. What came out of this workshop was that more information and technical assistance is required to assist industry and governments in complying with not only Basel Convention requirements, but also the Hong Kong Convention, which has not yet entered into force. From this feedback, the Basel Secretariat developed a project concept for the case study, which we're going to discuss today, essentially to give guidance to ship recycling facilities, mainly those employing the beaching method, as they are the predominant operators today, as to what compliance with both conventions might look like. So the objectives of the case study, I'll run through these very quickly. As I mentioned, to define what an operationally compliant ship recycling facility looks like, to look at operational, procedural, and infrastructural requirements, and then to elaborate a stepwise approach of how to achieve compliance in the short, medium, and long terms. So essentially like what the Basel Convention technical guidelines have done already, but also including Hong Kong Convention requirements. The outputs of the study are not only the case study itself, but also two sets of supportive guidance and train-the-trainer materials, which Roy will describe further, and these are replicable for use in all ship recycling countries, and as such will be translated into the languages of the main ship recycling countries. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Roy, who will take you through the outputs of the project, and then I will come back a bit later. Thank you.
Roy?
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I see you have unmuted my microphone for me, and I hope everybody can hear. And I have the control of the slides. Yes, I do. So we're just going to move on to the start of my presentation. This is the outline of the presentation. There are some 41 slides. In order to get through in the time that we have available for this webinar, I should be moving through these quite quickly, but I think, as you've already heard, these will be available online afterwards and emailed to you. I'm going to give you an overview of the case study and also a flavour of the guidance and training materials right towards the end. The work on that is just being finalised, and of course some feedback may even come out of this discussion that could be useful for that. So I'm going to talk first about the preparatory work before we develop the case study, and that initially required a number of field missions to Pakistan to observe the current practices, which was undertaken by a local consultant. A field mission to Turkey, because Turkey is considered to be a useful model in relation to studying ship recycling and the way it's being developed, particularly in the target countries for this case study and guidance. And then attendance at the relevant meetings of the Basel Convention and the IMO Marine Environment Protection Committee with respect to ship dismantling. So those three elements really contributed towards the background in developing a case study itself. The way this was done was by producing some quite lengthy questionnaires, which were used as a basis for determining the roles and responsibilities of governments, the ministries and the regulatory authorities, and to determine certain aspects of compliance, as well as looking at the other important issue for the Basel Convention, which is the downstream management of waste and the current practices that are employed to do that, particularly with respect to developing the case study model. This resulted in a number of reports, a baseline report on the conditions that were found from the questionnaire results, the actual capacity for downstream waste management, and the potential capacity, which involves looking at any infrastructure that could be adapted. That's described in the report itself. And then examining what options there might be for environmentally sound management, cost-effective technologies for particularly the disposal of hazardous waste that arises from ship recycling itself. Then there's a process of testing that by so-called road testing, which just effectively means talking to some of the participants in our consultative discussions. The development of the compliant models then is really focusing upon the issue of environmentally sound management of the hazardous materials and the hazardous waste, which involves identification, removal, handling, storage and preparation for dispatch to downstream waste management facilities at a ship recycling facility. I perhaps stress at this stage that although the Hong Kong and the Basel Convention cover a wide range of issues, these are the, if you will, the highlights, the specific areas that that this study is covering. We recognize that there are overlaps and very close linkages with, for example, occupational health and safety, and inevitably they come into some parts of the discussion, but they're not the main feature of this particular study. So we're identifying appropriate waste management channels for the key hazardous waste materials, and looking at those that are specifically on board ships, for example, as are set out in the Hong Kong Convention's inventory of hazardous materials. And that will lead us to devise methods to strengthen linkages between Basel and Hong Kong Convention throughout the entire ship recycling process. One can imagine in the future that both Basel and Hong Kong Conventions can be enforced, and how those two interplay smoothly will be an important issue. So some findings then of the work that was done from the field studies. We've looked in particular at Turkey, as I mentioned. The site is at Aliaga on the Aegean coast, and there is a number of facilities there, all with various certifications, quality management systems, and permits. They process around 300 ships a year, which is about 650,000 light displacement tons, so that's the actual weight of the ship in effect. And they use landing and afloat, or perhaps you might call them alongside methods, as it's a fairly hard base to start with on the Mediterranean coast there. And over time, it says on the slide, the facilities are substantially later hard standing with concreted roads and cutting areas. That has been developed over the last, I would say, 10 years or so. These facilities have been subject to continuous improvement. It's been active there since about 1974. Legislation has gradually developed to follow the Basel Convention for its management, as well as looking forward to the Hong Kong Convention. Perhaps fairly rare, the Ship Recycling Association of Turkey is also operational. It is certainly an interesting feature of the way that they work there. They have a waste management centre which provides specialist training, specialist techniques such as for asbestos removal and storage for liquids, and that's available to all of the operators at the facility. But off-site, they take hazardous waste from ship recycling over to specialist incineration, some distance in fact, and to hazardous waste landfills, particularly for materials like asbestos, which is the normal route for such waste. Another feature of the field studies that we discussed at some length with the representatives of the ministries is that there are several of them involved, and this is not an unusual situation where you have typically ministries of shipping, ministries of environment, ministries of industry, and the legal framework therefore for ship recycling can be quite complex. There can be a number of different pieces of legislation, all of which apply either on-site at the ship recycling facility or off-site. They apply in Turkey the Basel Convention controls for hazardous waste import and have local inspectors that carry out the inspection work. I think it's important to notice that they have emphasized in the discussions we have with them that they do actually carry out enforcement action when that's considered to be necessary in order to back up the inspections and the legislation. Now, what better to describe how they do what they do than to actually use some of their own work. You might call that plagiarism, I call it a compliment. But the next 10 slides will actually show you some of the work that they've done themselves that they've presented to us. So thanks to them for some description. That's an example of the legal framework. This is simply for waste. I won't dwell upon the slide, but it shows you the level of complexity that's required in order to cover the many different aspects for sound and proper environmental management of the huge variety of materials that arise as waste that require to be controlled. That's not unusual. Turkey also has a National Waste Management Plan. It covers current 5-year period up to 2013 with a number of key waste streams, which you can see a dozen of them there. And they include hazardous waste, which would come from ships as well, that are requiring to be managed properly as well as strategically to make sure that, for example, sufficient capacity is available. They work on the basis of the Basel Convention through the environmental law of 1983 and the bylaw on hazardous waste control. They identify criteria for the expected level of environmental protection and have set standards against which monitoring and inspection can be carried out. It is, I think, as many will know, the only region in the area which makes it a very suitable case from the point of view of this case study. Just a couple of pictures of the Ship Recyclers Association facilities, which has got a nice liquid and solid waste storage facility for use by companies. Here's an example of pictures of some of the yards, showing in the top left a drainage channel that will intercept runoff to prevent any contaminated water from going back into the sea. You'll see significant areas of hard standing in the top right picture. That's a concrete base on which dismantling activities are carried out. And in the bottom you can see some development is taking place to increase the area of hard standing. Inevitably, with all that legislation, there'll be quite a few documents, and the local region is near. The provincial directorate requires all of these and some more. I wouldn't be surprised, in order to make sure that all of the aspects for ship import for recycling are covered. Notice particularly ship recycling plan, part of the Hong Kong Convention, is already there as part of their requirements. Just looking a little bit away from the shore side, protection of the marine environment through booms and absorbent materials is, I think, a good practice for making it sure that oil pollution and so on does not extend beyond the immediate vicinity of the vessel. Some we actually, on the site visit on the day that we went to Aliaga, saw there of the lift barrier and how it was being deployed. And the basic policy of Turkey is, as we've said, until the Hong Kong Convention comes into force, based around the Basel Convention and using the current guidelines of the Basel Convention and the MEPC approved IMO guidelines on ship recycling for the Hong Kong Convention. Not yet in force, of course, but have been agreed, and therefore they're useful models to take into account. So that's Turkey's summary of the way in which they carry out environmentally sound management, facilities operating to ESN standards, technology is appropriate for the waste disposal. They use management systems and data and information, and the communication, I think, is a good point between the industry and the government, without which it's very hard to achieve effective compliance and sharing of best practice information. And just one last shot of hazardous waste landfill. It's probably got more in it now, because I think that's a few years old, but shows you a typical line system for protecting groundwater and the environment around the site, and making sure that hazardous waste is contained once it's put there. Just some words on the field studies that were undertaken in Pakistan. And this is where the beaching method is used. In some senses, is not dissimilar to that used in Turkey, where in effect the boat is hauled up onto the shore and dismantled. So the baseline report looked into this. There's a larger site, 314 plots of about 4 acres each, and some 1/3 of these being developed. An earlier study was undertaken that was reviewed as part of this work from the World Bank, and identified a number of features of the facilities at Pakistan, amongst which was that asbestos is going to remain a significant long-term problem, as it was known to be still there in some fairly newly built vessels. Polychlorinated biphenyls still occur in older vessels and naval vessels, in cabling and various other parts of a ship. Could be solid or could be liquid in the case of transformers, where it's used as a dielectric. The cables themselves being a particular area of concern that not necessarily always looked for. And there appeared to be a lack of collection and management options for ozone-depleting substances, like used in firefighting and other means. The method of dismantling does give rise to paint chips, which themselves can pollute the working environment. And inevitably there are volumes of oil and indeed oily water that need to be managed. As a result of which, the estimates from the World Bank report were that some 5,000 tons of asbestos, 16,000 tons of PCB and 14,000 tons of ozone-depleting substances might accumulate in Pakistan as a result of ship recycling over the next 20 years. The method of control is based around a no objection certificate, which in terms of the Hong Kong Convention will require significant development in order to ultimately become compliant with that. And that really means that there will need to be some extensive institutional building and infrastructure upgrading to meet the standards and indeed development of new legislation as and when Pakistan decides that they wish to go in that direction. The World Bank study report looked at the issues for recommendation in order to achieve certain objectives, such as reducing the risks to impacts on workers and the environment of any unsafe dismantling practices, provide safe storage, transport and disposal options for hazardous materials, and in order to look at means of achieving this through, for example, financing investments by perhaps entering into public-private partnerships and the possibility of pre-cleaning of ships before they were broken. And the recommendations to support those objectives look like this, obviously taking them out from a fairly long report, but it included improvement of enforcement on the ground, building a strategy for institutional capacity building, enforcement of regulations, and investment in waste management facilities, technical capacity building, and investment particularly in the downstream hazardous waste management, both really for Hong Kong Convention compliance and for the Basel Convention, where hazardous waste materials needs to be treated in environmentally sound management. That is the kind of area where interventions on public-private partnerships might prove useful, as is done in a number of other countries. The investigations that were carried out on the current situation from the questionnaires and interviews which I mentioned earlier as part of the local consultant's baseline report looked at the way that ship recycling is carried out currently and found that the basic institutional arrangements are, as in Turkey, spread across several ministries. There are facilities operating in one geographic area, as in Turkey, but the facilities for hazardous waste disposal are really lacking, particularly for asbestos, PCB, and ozone-depleting substances. And this really reflects pretty much the situation as discovered in the World Bank report and its conclusions. So some actions to fill the gaps that have been proposed as part of the case study are these, looking at the recycling yards themselves to develop the infrastructure, particularly with respect to containment for fixed plant, materials such as winching and so on, waste and material storage, and suitable mobile plants for more hard-standing areas, the more one can make use of the efficient mobile plant. Management procedures and training to follow that up. Downstream waste management will be recommended that a full waste survey, including waste arising from other industry, is undertaken so that appropriate sizing and establishment of facilities for safe disposal of asbestos waste, PCB, ODS, oily sludges and oils that cannot be recycled or used as a fuel, and landfill of other waste for which there's no other management option, in other words, recycling or reuse in some form, will be needed. On the competent authority side, there are two approaches for this. A needs assessment of the manpower and skills, training and capacity building, and a program of inspections for monitoring and compliance are all part of the mix that would be useful in order to extend and develop the implementation of both Basel and Hong Kong Convention requirements. The compliant model for this, therefore, is based upon both these two instruments, not forgetting the ILO instruments as well, as we mentioned before, but to cover these particular points: environmentally sound management at yards, environmentally sound management at downstream facilities, and monitoring programs to measure that the level of environmentally sound management that desired is achieved, and that uses tools such as environmental assessment. Coincidentally almost, but clearly it will be formally more than that, occupational safety and health will also be provided for by similar activities such as risk identification, safety systems of work, which are also environmentally safe, and appropriate use of PPE. The case study itself shows a number of checklists of the criteria for, because this is meant to be replicable for a number of other countries, in order to see what the current situation is and to help to monitor progress. Maybe that these can be abstracted and these questions are used by any country that is considering or is in the process of wishing to improve its compliance with Basel and Hong Kong conventions. There's an action checklist as well that identifies, with an updated version of, in effect, one of the tables from the Basel Convention guidelines to look at, over a shorter time, because the Basel Convention guidelines are now some 10 years old, but within 1, 3, and 8 years, progressive installation of better equipment, facilities, and techniques. Just a few words then to finish off on the guidance and the training materials. As Susan mentioned, 2 sets of supportive guidance and training materials are being finalised for management and supervisors at ship recycling facilities, and also for the competent authorities. They are different in character because the management and supervisors at ship recycling facilities really geared towards simple descriptions of effective techniques. The competent authority guidelines will be more addressed towards the practices of inspection and monitoring for compliance. They will have some common features between them, such as what does environmentally sound management look like, but the idea is that more or less any country that is using these should be able to recognize them and apply them in their own style. So these are the essential points for management supervisors, what constitutes ESM, steps to be taken to facilitate operations downstream. That means things like making sure that waste is properly kept safe, not mixed, fed and packaged. The operational procedural steps required at a ship recycling facility to ensure compliance with Basel Convention, and the management aspect, key roles and competences of staff to ensure that those obligations are met. Similarly, the first and the last, that was my other computer, sorry, of the guidance for the competent authorities responsible for regulating about what constitutes ESM. There should be a common understanding and key roles and competencies. The other aspects for regulators and inspectors are what processes should be used in order to be effective for monitoring the compliance at the ship recycling facility and also at the downstream waste facilities. Just a few pictures. This illustrates some of the points that we've been talking about. The dismantling on the beach, that actually is a photograph of a ship, the River Dance, that came ashore at Blackpool Beach in England and was dismantled even on sand without causing any pollution by using equipment that had low ground bearing capacity, alternative ways of making sure that it can be done safely. This illustrates how to store materials so that they're kept safe, separate and identifiable. And some of the illustrations that are used in the train materials for making sure that wastes are kept separate, showing a right and a wrong way, and how to make sure that they are kept away from the environment by safe storage. And inspectors need things like checklists themselves to ensure that they are covering all the necessary points when they do a facility inspection to be expanded on the guidance itself. And that's my piece for now, and I'd like to say thank you for listening to me, and hand you back to Susan for concluding before we get to question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roy. Very interesting presentation. I am just going to, before I move on to the next part of the webinar, I'd just like to say that the case study that Roy's just provided an overview of will be available on the Basel website early next week. And the guidance and training materials, they're currently being consulted on, and they should be available soon after. So just to move on now to capacity building projects that we're currently working on. Firstly, we are undertaking a feasibility study looking at alternatives to the beaching method. Now, you'll note for the case study was really focused on those countries employing the beaching method as the predominant method of ship recycling today. However, we notice, we recognize that in the medium to long term, we of course want to move away from beaching if possible. So this study looks at providing models of alternative environmentally sound ship recycling operations. It also looks to identify interested parties and industry partners and sites for their establishment, and also looking at the regulatory drivers in potential countries. I should say that we're actually going on a mission to China shortly. Myself and the consultants retained to undertake this project, as the predominant method used in China, which is pier breaking or alongside, offers a viable alternative to beaching. So we will be undertaking investigations in China. And just to finish off there, this study will be finished in February of next year, and it is also funded by the European Union. A second project, which is a sizable project that we're going to be undertaking in Bangladesh and Pakistan, looks at developing downstream waste management capacity. Now, it's one thing, of course, for the ship recycling facilities to comply with Basel and Hong Kong conventions, for the governments to have regulations in place to ensure that compliance, but really what is crucial, especially from a Basel perspective, is ensuring that the waste that results from the ship recycling process is handled in an environmentally sound manner. Now, in both Bangladesh and Pakistan, at this time, this is an area of challenge, not only for ship recycling, but also for other industrial activities. So this project, which we're actually in the preparatory stage of at the moment, will look at developing inventories of hazardous waste for the Chittagong area in Bangladesh and the Gadani hub region in Pakistan. This is where the ship recycling activities take place in both countries. And then from this, these hazardous waste assessment reports, the consultants who are yet to be retained, both local and international, will develop business cases to assist governments and industry in enhancing the downstream capacity for the environmentally sound management of hazardous materials. Now, this is, as I said, in the preparatory phase. We're having discussions at the moment with the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation and the International Maritime Organization, as in Bangladesh, this project will form part of a larger project that they are undertaking, and we're also in discussions with the government of Pakistan. So this work will be completed by the end of 2013. So a bit longer term in terms of this project. So this concludes our presentation. I will hand back to Dan now, who I believe will be managing the question and answer session. Thank you very much.